holding space talk, which is very exciting. For anyone who doesn't know, I am Caroline. I'm the CEO of Space, and Space is based just around the corner in Regent Street in Runcorn, and we are a not-for-profit mental health service serving the community. So we do anything at all that's related to helping our community have better mental health. So this talk is obviously part of that. We're all about empowering the community with knowledge, so we hope that this is going to do that. And these holding space talks are all about bringing high quality talks to our community that we would all normally have to travel to see, to the city centre or somewhere further. So we've got lots of information around about what Space do. We do lots of different events, different workshops, anything at all that helps to improve mental health and wellbeing. We also have a listening service which operates 10 till 2 every day apart from Monday. You're on your own with your mental health on Monday. And that is a free drop-in that anyone can come, and we have our mental health ambassadors there ready to talk to you if you're just feeling like you just want someone to talk to, if you're struggling with your mental health and don't know where to go, you're feeling isolated. And we also have a really good cafe as well that's open to anyone, whether you're struggling with your mental health or not, you can come in. We do some really good matcha at the minute. So yeah, if anybody will be around for the whole night, if anyone wants to know anything more about Space, you can come and grab me. We've also got a couple of people here, Abby and Harry, that have got the Space t-shirts on, and a couple of our volunteers as well. So we're happy to give you any more information about what Space does and about mental health generally in Holton as well. So I'm sure you've not all come here to listen to me talk anyway. So I'm just going to introduce Alex. He's going to start his talk. We're going to have a little interval, and then we're going to carry on with the talk as well. So if anyone's wondering if they're going to get a break for the toilet, yes you are, about half an hour. Okay, so can you please have a big round of applause, a big Runcorn welcome for Alex Partridge.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you so much for the invitation. It's so nice to get out of London. I think it would be a good idea to sort of explain a little bit about my journey and what led me to get an ADHD diagnosis, and then something to go on really about what I've learned since that point, and from my own experience, and also from speaking to really 400 now experts on my podcast, ADHD Chatter. But my journey through neurodiversity really starts like so many of us in the community does, which is feeling different and feeling misunderstood. My earliest memory of feeling different was in a playground when I was 6 years old. Someone said to me, "You could be one of the cool kids, Alex, if you weren't so weird." I had like literally hundreds of comments like that throughout my school years, and I didn't really think too much of them at the time, but in reflection, they sort of compounded to create an adult that felt intrinsically broken and was very fearful of criticism and rejection. I always had this hyperactive mind. I describe my internal thoughts as having 10 highly caffeinated squirrels barreling around up there. And in some situations, that enables me to be very creative and to start businesses. But in other environments, like a classroom, that those squirrels create a lot of anxiety. I remember when I was 7, I was sat in the back of the classroom, happily daydreaming, minding my own business, and out of nowhere, the teacher pointed at me and said, "Alex, do you know the answer to this question?" And all of the classmates turned and looked at me. And in that moment, I felt my heart rate going. I remember it started speeding up. And I stood up, ran out of the classroom, and I found someone in the corridor. And I said, "Please call an ambulance, I'm having a heart attack." And of course I wasn't having a heart attack. The paramedic reassured me that I was having my first anxiety attack at 7 years old. That juxtaposition between how I was presenting at school, which was very shut down, very overstimulated, very overwhelmed, compared to how I was presenting at home, which was the opposite. In my bedroom, very calm, very safe. I was starting businesses at that same age. When I was 7, the same year as that first anxiety attack, I started my first business. It was a board game. I went through my parents' board games and found all of the companies that manufactured all of the board games, and I spent the evenings making my own board game, designing all the pieces, the board, the instructions, and I sent it off to all of these companies, and 2 weeks went past, I didn't hear anything, but then I had one reply and it said, "Alex, And I think they could tell I was really young because my handwriting was really messy. They said, unfortunately, we're not looking for any new designs at the moment, but always lean into that entrepreneurial spirit. And I really listened to that. And the next 15 years really was a continuation of this juxtaposition between being very shut down in school and being very creative and entrepreneurial at home. But when the time came to go to university, I didn't really have any confidence in my ability to be an entrepreneur anymore, because I had this sort of history of abandoned projects. I had started business after business after business, got really excited in the early days, and then quit, abandoned them. So when the time came to go to university, I had lost a lot of confidence in my ability to be an entrepreneur. So I decided to go to university because that's what everyone else was doing. And I went to one lecture, and the lecturer didn't even need to look at me. I remember the anxiety coming back. I stood up, walked off an anxiety attack around the streets of Oxford. I went to Oxford Brookes. But I went back to my university bedroom, and I had an idea to create a late night pizza delivery company. And I impulsively spent half of my student loan on this huge 6-foot giant freezer. Filled it with it was like 2 delivery guys, just about got it into my bedroom. Filled it with Tesco frozen pizzas, made a Facebook page called Quick Pizza, and if you wanted a pizza in the middle of the night, you would text me, I'd throw one of the pizzas in the oven, and I had 7 people cycling around Oxford delivering pizzas in the middle of the night to students after the shops had shut. But then the university shut me down because I didn't have a food safety hygiene. So I had that spark, but the attention to detail was missing at that stage. In my second year of university, that's when social media was really dominating. Everyone was talking about Facebook. Something inside my mind activated, I now know it would be called hyperfocus. I became totally obsessed with Facebook. That was the year I started LADbible and UniLad, and I just went into tunnel vision. Like something sparked inside of me, it activated this hyperfocus. They both grew incredibly fast. And I got an email from one of the biggest UK pizza companies offering me an amount of money to be promoted on the page. And I thought, if I somehow conquer my anxiety and go to lectures and get my degree, the amount that this pizza company is offering me is more than I will get in my graduate salary. And I left university the next week. I went back to my parents' house to continue building these 2 brands. But that's when I started to struggle, because I didn't have the word for it. I would now call it overwhelm. I had UniLad on one screen, LADbible on the other, both with millions of followers, both with huge brands trying to get sponsorship. I needed help, and I put out an advert to ask for help. I ended up meeting these 2 men in Brighton. We were all going to go into business together. And I remember that day when we met, that my intuition was screaming at me, telling me not to trust these 2 men. My judge of character, my internal radar was going off. But because I was such a people pleaser, so terrified of confrontation, didn't know how to say no, and unable to put any boundaries around me, I signed the bit of paper. A week later, I woke up and I'd been completely kicked out of the company, completely removed. I went to see a solicitor, and he said, he looked at what I had signed, and he said, if you want to fight this, firstly, they're not allowed to have done what they've done, but if you want to fight this, it will be won or lost in court, and you'll have to give evidence on the witness box. My mind flashed forward to the thought of me giving evidence, the judge, their legal team, my legal team, the press were going to be there, and my mind flashed back to that little boy in the classroom with all of that attention on him. I jumped up, ran out of my solicitor's office, went to buy a bottle of vodka. And I can only tell you what the nurse told me when I woke up in hospital the next morning, which was that 2 members of the public had found me in an alleyway, still clutching the bottle. And I tried to stagger away, I tripped, I hit my head on the wall, and they called an ambulance. And as the nurse was telling me this, I remember the shame and the anxiety and the embarrassment. And in that naive state, as the nurse was telling me this, I remember I need more alcohol to cure this anxiety. And I knew there was a petrol station near the hospital. And I jumped up from the hospital bed, ran out of the ward, got to the entrance of the hospital. Security had been called. I tried to barge past them. Long story short, before I knew it, I was in the back of a police car. And my parents had been called. And I remember just seeing my mum, I made eye contact with my mum through the glass window of the police car. And they were just looking at me with this look of fear and desperation in their eyes. They didn't know what was wrong with me. That took me to Alcoholics Anonymous, where I first heard those 4 letters, ADHD, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Fast forward 2 months, the trial happened, I was cross-examined for 6 days, even the judge said it was excessive. But I got through it. The judge was very accommodating. He let me take regular breaks, he let me walk off the anxiety. Fast forward another 2 months, my phone went and it was my solicitor. He said, "Alex, are you on your own?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You've won everything. You've won the company's back." And I remember just falling to my knees and bursting into tears, because for me, yes, it was a 5-year legal battle, but for me it was a huge mental health battle that nearly cost me my life. And after the court case, I was really reflecting on the mental contradictions that I was experiencing up until that point in my life. On the one hand, I could be very entrepreneurial and very creative, but on the other hand, the things I put around me to protect me from criticisms and rejections were really detrimental. They were turning me into this huge people pleaser, this person who didn't know how to say no. And in that case, with not knowing how to say no on that day when I was presented with that bit of paper, it triggered a court case that nearly cost me my life. And as I researched this contradiction, the more those 4 letters kept coming up, ADHD. And as I got assessed, my parents filled out a questionnaire, my long-term partner filled out a questionnaire. I had a 2-hour meeting with a psychologist, and she looked at me and said, "Alex, your ADHD is clear as hell." And I remember going into problem-solving mode. I really wanted to understand what it was that I had just been diagnosed with. So I Googled, what is ADHD? And it said what a doctor would tell you if a doctor was here today. It said that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder characterized by traits of impulsivity, forgetfulness, and disorganization. And that really disheartened me, because although we have to recognize some of the challenges, I think ADHD, once understood and once managed, it can also be creativity and pattern recognition and being calm in a crisis and being able to zoom out and see details that other people miss, being resilient and loyal, being entrepreneurial. People with ADHD are 4 times more likely to start their own business. All of these assets, all of these traits make someone with ADHD a tremendous asset and a positive force in society and in the workplace. But as I spoke to thousands of people in the community, I was saddened by the fact that so many people, A, just didn't know that they were living with ADHD, how much they were masking, and therefore they didn't understand some of the challenges that they were facing. And for that group of people, which I realized at that stage was a significant amount of people, ADHD to them meant a lifetime of being told that you're too sensitive, being told that you're too much, or being told that you're not enough. Not understanding why you feel like you need to put on a mask and change your entire personality in order to be more palatable or likable for whoever you're stood in front of on any given day. It's not understanding why some people seem to just sort of glide through life with ease, yet certain things for you are such a challenge. It's not understanding why the tiniest criticism or rejection can be so instantly physically painful for you. But then you get a diagnosis, or you become aware that you are living with ADHD, and you can reflect on all of that. You can look back through your life through this new lens of understanding, and you can begin to realize that you have always been enough, and that you were never broken, you were simply different. From speaking to nearly 400 people now on my podcast, it's so clear that in order to access and to enable many positives that come with having ADHD, you really have to understand the 3 challenges. And for me, the first one is executive function, and the certain difficulties that come with that, and the overwhelm that can come with having these squirrels barreling around in your head. And I think for me, the best way to explain ADHD overwhelm is with a pen. Now, this pen represents a neurotypical person's brain. And this pen has one tip, and the tip represents a thought. And because there is only one tip, one thought, it's easy for that thought to turn into an action. This pen, which I'm sure we'll all recognise, represents an ADHD brain. This pen has multiple tips, multiple thoughts. This thought is, I need to text my friend back. This thought is, I need to tidy my flat. This thought is, I need to reply to that email. This thought is, I need to eat. And with the ADHD brain, all of these thoughts are happening simultaneously. And it creates a chaos inside that blocks any of them from being able to turn into an action. And for me, that's the best explanation for ADHD overwhelm. And the problems come with, if someone doesn't have an understanding, what that could look like to an outsider, to a colleague or to a partner or to a friend. Because on some days when ADHD overwhelm is so bad, it can physically paralyze you. It can render you unable to get off the sofa and not stop scrolling social media, because that's the only thing that's distracting you from that inner critic saying how useless you are. That's the reality of that inner critic sometimes. And when someone observes that who doesn't understand ADHD overwhelm, then you're met with comments like, why are you so lazy? Why can't you just do the thing? Why can't you just start? But of course, speaking to the experts and recognizing my understanding is that there are solutions. Firstly, recognizing that this is going on in your head and being kind to yourself, that it's not your fault and you're not broken, but also to recognize that there is a neurological difference in the mind of someone with ADHD. You know, I'm not a scientist, but in essence, having spoken to many, I can summarize by the ADHD brain is a deficiency of dopamine and noradrenaline in the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain behind the forehead. And it creates real issues with being able to regulate and to prioritize tasks. But the thing is, I think, to get the dopamine that we require in order to maximize these things, and I spoke to a brilliant neuroscientist on my podcast called TJ Power, and he explained the difference to me between effort-based dopamine and non-effort-based dopamine. Non-effort-based dopamine is dopamine we might get through doing tasks that are relatively easy, like scrolling social media or eating sugar. Really low-quality dopamine. But the difference is, if you want to maintain that focus and to improve traits of ADHD overwhelm, it's important to do tasks that are effort-based dopamine. And that's different to everyone, but for me that involves doing simple tasks at the very start of the day that I find challenging. And for me that's making the bed, that's doing simple things, getting exercise in as early as possible. The trajectory of my day, my focus, my productivity is significantly altered if I get movement in at the start of the day. Also for me, to combat the executive function challenges, I keep things visual. I get those thoughts out of my head and onto paper. I have a massive whiteboard on every wall in my flat. I used to be so shameful about some of the things I put in place to manage the challenging aspects of ADHD. I'm 36, I don't need a big whiteboard on every wall in my flat, but I do. It works for me. And when a thought comes into my mind, I write it down instantly. Otherwise, it will get forgotten about. And also, I try to optimize and figure out when my brain works the best. And for me, that's in the evening. My nighttime brain is considerably more productive and efficient than my morning brain. So I use my nighttime brain to help out my morning Alex. So I think of 5 tasks tomorrow in the evening that need to be done, 5 high priority tasks. And I write each one down on a bracelet, those rubber bracelets you can buy off the internet, those cheap rubber bracelets. And when I wake up in the morning, I put on all the 5 bracelets. And as I go through the day, and I complete each corresponding task, I take off that bracelet and I put it in a bowl. And if I get through the day and I fill up the bowl, then I reward myself. I buy myself something off my Amazon wish list. Essentially, I gamify it. And I create accountability here as well. Outside of myself, I share my goals with my partner, my colleagues, my friends, and we can have check-ins to ensure or to keep each other on track. The second challenge that has to be understood with ADHD, I truly believe is RSD. It stands for rejection sensitive dysphoria. And it is a debilitating, horrible response to criticisms or rejections. And they don't even need to be real. They could be perceived. Your boss could ask you for a quick chat on a Monday morning without any context, and you instantly catastrophize and think you're going to get fired. And you won't sleep until you get some reassurance that your world isn't about to end. Or someone could reply to your text message with a thumbs up emoji, and you instantly think that that person now hates you. Or you could be showing someone your favourite film and they get up to use the bathroom, and you say, "Do you want me to pause it?" And they say, "No, don't worry." It's a physical attack. All of these things sound to some like irrational, but to many people with ADHD, it's a real, physiological, visceral, instant pain in response to these real or perceived criticisms. So where does it come from? I spoke to Dr. Samantha Hugh, PhD, on my podcast, specialises in this topic, and she was telling me that children with ADHD experience 20,000 more negative criticisms during their childhood. 20,000 little comments. Stop fidgeting. Why can't you just do the thing? Why are you so weird, Alex? 20,000 more. And she said that they compound over a child's childhood to create a brain that under a scan looks very similar to one who has suffered complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's no wonder that when someone with an adult who has ADHD encounters a criticism or a rejection, we get triggered. And our nervous system is snapped back to the memories of all of those nasty comments that we received. But the first step to managing it is recognizing that all of those 20,000 comments that you received as a kid, they weren't your fault, because the differences that you have aren't a bad thing. And once you realize that those 20,000 comments aren't your fault, then you can begin to realize that the response you're having today is also not your fault. And that can go a long way to alleviating some of the shame that comes with the reaction. But the response is real, it is tangible, we feel it. So what can you do in the moment? Well, I think you can remove yourself from the situation. I think it's so important because you're not responding to what that person has said in the here and the now, today. Your nervous system is responding to all of those 20,000 comments from your past, and what that person has said in the here and the now has reminded you of those. And therefore, your response to what that person has said today is probably not going to be proportionate to what they've said. So the best thing to do is to recognize when you are triggered and remove yourself from the situation, to allow yourself time to regulate. And then you can approach the situation with a clearer mind. And Dr. Samantha Hughes, she also recognized some strategies you can do in the moment, like biting down on ice. She said you can bite down on ice, you can put your hands under freezing cold water, you can get in a cold shower to distract your nervous system and pull it out of the moment. One of the consequences of RSD is this thing that is what we do, we put around ourselves to protect ourselves from that pain of being triggered. Like that day I signed that bit of paper I shouldn't have done. But what it's so important is because many people, when you don't have an understanding, your knee-jerk reaction is to say yes to things you might not want to do. If your boss asks you to take on a new work project, or someone asks you to go to a social event, it might be your knee-jerk reaction to say yes because you don't want to offend. But it's such a simple change to reframe that, rather than saying yes, just to simply say, can I let you know tomorrow? Apply that 24-hour rule. Give time between the ask and your response. Give yourself time to get away from that knee-jerk reaction, because actually if you just apply that 24-hour rule, 9 times out of 10 it will be a no. And you put that boundary in place to protect your energy that is so finite, particularly with those with ADHD. And the third challenge that I truly believe has to be understood before we can unlock the many positives that come with ADHD is the third one that I've really struggled with, and many of us have, and that's masking. I truly believe that people with ADHD are the world's best actors. If there was we're incredible at playing a character called Normal. If there was an Oscar Academy Award for playing a character called Normal, we would be on stage collecting the award every single night. We're brilliant shapeshifters, chameleons, we adapt, we copy other people's tone of voice, mannerisms, we copy someone's entire interest base sometimes, just so we don't offend, just so we feel like they like us. And this can feel good in the short term, but the long-term consequences of this, when not understood, can be really, really sad, because you lose touch of who you really are underneath. Years and years and years of masking, shape-shifting, and you lose touch of your true identity. And because of this, for many, I truly believe that ADHD isn't so much a deficit of attention. Because when someone with ADHD finds something that truly aligns with their core, we don't have a deficit of attention towards that thing. If anything, we have an abundance of attention towards that thing. When someone with ADHD truly understands who they really are, and they find something that aligns with that, that's when the ADHD person will become the best in the world at that thing. They will hyper-focus on that thing, and there will be no stopping that person, and that person will achieve huge success. But because of this masking, I truly believe that ADHD is more a deficit of self-awareness. Many people don't even realise sometimes how thick the mask is. So when we're presented with opportunities every day, it could be small things or big things like a new relationship or a new job or a new hobby, we don't know if that thing is a good alignment to who we really are. And we're acting on short-term dopamine. So when that new hobby comes into our now, we say yes, we get very excited, we buy that domain, we jump into that new relationship, we start that new job. But when the honeymoon period passes, we quickly find out if it is or if it's not a true alignment to our core. And that's when we quit, because most often it won't be. We'll leave that relationship, we'll leave that job. That domain that we just bought for that new hobby will enter that graveyard of domains that so many people with ADHD have. Building your self-awareness is critical. And how do you do that? I think asking yourself some really basic questions as often as you can. What happened today that made me happy? What happened today that made me sad? What happened today that I found easy? What happened today that I struggled with? Ask yourself these, but you have to be honest. Like, it's so important, because sometimes the mask is so thick you don't realise that the answers to these questions are also part of the mask. But if you do this often enough, you can build up this arsenal of self-awareness that will give you an edge in many areas of life, but also allow you to understand who you really are. And therefore, when an opportunity, that new person, that new relationship, that new hobby comes into your now, and you're deciding whether to go for it or not, you have a better understanding if it's a good fit. And once you have that better understanding, that's when you can start saying yes to things that are in alignment with your inner child and who you really are. But sometimes it's not enough to just ask yourself those questions. Sometimes you have to listen to your knee-jerk reactions. I think it's so important to be aware of the responses inside of us that happen subconsciously before the conscious version of you has an opportunity to respond. And what do I mean by that? For example, if you're reading a newspaper and you see an advert for a musical theatre show, and you see that they're casting for a role, and you instantly, intrinsically fill up with joy. You're so excited about going to that audition. But then you remember that your parents wanted you to be a doctor, and you suppress that excitement towards the musical theatre role. That's what I mean about our knee-jerk reactions. And they'll be separate and individual to everyone in this room. But it's so important to pay attention to your knee-jerk reactions, journal them, meditate them, and over time you can really build up this picture of who you really are. Because those knee-jerk reactions, they're your inner child screaming out, remember me? Like, this is who you are. And it's so important, especially with someone with ADHD who has been masking and has suppressed that version of them perhaps for so long, to listen to that inner child. I think we will take a break for a bit. More to say, but we'll have some questions in a break. Thank you very much. Hello, welcome back to part 2. I thought it'd be useful just to maybe go through some of the habits that I've adopted since understanding that I have ADHD that have made a massive impact on the trajectory of my outcomes. And the first one is, I have this concept called this metaphorical ideas shelf. And what I mean by that is when something comes into my now and I'm presented with an opportunity, whether that's a new hobby or a new whatever it might be, rather than acting on it straight away and impulsively buying that domain, I put it on my metaphorical idea shelf. I just shelf it. And if it's still pulling on my interest strings, say a week later, then for me that's a really strong indication that the core points of that opportunity are in alignment with the real Alex, the inner version of me. And you can take the findings of your self-awareness exercises and almost compare the points of that opportunity during that break that having that metaphorical idea shelf creates. And if it is still pulling on your interest strings a week later, then that's a really good indicator that the points of that opportunity are a good fit, and then you could buy that domain, you could start that project. Because when you start putting that break between the opportunity in front of you and taking the first step towards that opportunity, you can put that pause and you can analyze it, you can sort of zoom out, and that puts you in a much better position to make a more informed choice on whether that thing is a good or not a good fit for you. The third thing, the second thing the habit that I've done is really try to combat imposter syndrome. Because for me, my whole life, and I didn't realize it, but imposter syndrome has been really challenging. And what do I mean by imposter syndrome? It's like not feeling qualified for doing a job that you are actually capable of doing. And this can show up in all areas of your life. And I strongly believe that it comes from the fact that many people with ADHD, we deal with something called object permanence. Things are either in our now, they're right in front of us, or they're not. And when things aren't in our now, we can forget that they exist. They can cease to exist for us. And this is true for many things. It's why we can forget to reply to text messages. It's why we can put the washing machine on and forget to empty it because it's not in our now. But I think it's so important to realize that this object permanence phenomenon can also apply to success and achievements. I think it's called success amnesia. And it can create imposter syndrome. It means you're not qualified, you don't feel confident to do the job again. When you are capable, you are qualified, you are the right person to do it. So the way I combat that is I intentionally journal. I really take time to reflect on my achievements. So I cement that accomplishment into my subconscious. So for example, if I talk on stage, I get asked to talk on stage a couple of times a month. And each time, before I started doing this exercise, I felt like such an imposter. I felt so anxious. I didn't sleep the night before. Why have they asked me? I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm the wrong person to do it. But when I started intentionally journaling on the feelings that I had after I came off stage the time before, then I was able to cement that evidence inside my subconscious that I was the right person to do it. So my biggest advice for anyone who suffers with imposter syndrome is really to intentionally set time as often as you can to really meditate, to journal, to cement the evidence that you are capable of doing whatever it is in your life that you're tasked with doing. Because people with ADHD are brilliant at so many things. We just often forget that we are brilliant. So when the time comes to do that thing again, we can get very anxious. The third habit that I've started to do is to really recognize that my energy is very limited, particularly as an ADHD person. I'm very vulnerable to burnout. I can easily overcommit, take on too much, say yes to something that I might not actually want to do. And it's this cycle of overcommitting and then going into burnout. And the habit to combat this for me is to really become aware of my early signs of burnout. And those will be different to every single person in this room. They're very unique to you. My early signs of burnout is, for example, if I start eating crap food, if I start ordering takeaways, like if my exercise in the morning stops, if I start getting grumpy and irritable, all of these things are an early sign that I need to take my foot off the accelerator, take a break, have a pause, give myself time to recharge, lie on the sofa. I like to call it the recharging mat. Give myself time to, because if you're not aware of your own early signs of burnout, it's very like an ADHD person to just plow through and to ignore it and to be very stubborn and to overwork and to push through. But then you leave yourself very vulnerable. You leave yourself very vulnerable to being massively triggered by RSD. You leave yourself massively vulnerable to having a huge row. You leave yourself massively vulnerable to relapsing if you are somebody who has issues with alcohol like I do. You leave yourself vulnerable to a whole range of things. So it's so important to really recognize when you feel like you're approaching burnout and to document those early stages so that you can adjust your course. You can take a break, take a pause, give yourself time to recharge. The fourth thing, the habit that I've really started to do is, and as a business person, this has really been the thing that has altered my path. This has been the one that enabled the social media brands to be a success. This is the one that has enabled the podcast now to reach, to grow from 0 to 7 million followers in 2 years. This is the one. And that's to really understand that I am allergic to boredom. I am totally allergic to boredom. It is our kryptonite with ADHD. And it's so important to recognize that sometimes and to find ways to inject novelty and excitement and fun into whatever it is that you are doing. And it's about finding the bricks within your business or your relationship or your hobby. And what I mean by that is it's so easy for someone with ADHD to, in the context of, say, starting a new business, to go all in at the beginning, to get really excited, go a million miles an hour, to buy the domain, design the logo, build the website, hire a load of people, and you can build a brick wall, i.e. the business, in a really short amount of time. Because we are amazing at doing things really fast. But the danger there is you could be stood in the shadow of this brick wall and you get very overwhelmed because you have absolutely no idea how all of the individual bricks work. And you're stood in the shadow, you're very overwhelmed, you're very anxious, and you quit. And that's when you'll abandon it. Maybe that comes after 2 weeks, maybe that comes after 2 months, maybe that comes after 2 years. It's so important to find those bricks within your business. Find a way to break the icebergs, the big daunting tasks, into ice cubes, into smaller ones, and to create mini obsessions, mini hyper-focuses around each one. Inject that novelty, inject that push boredom away and out of it. That's the way that every person that I've met with ADHD who's grown a business, who's stuck at that hobby, they found the ice cubes, they found the bricks within their business. And the last one really is to advocate for yourself. Like, it's so important as an ADHD person to have the confidence to advocate for yourself, whether that's in your relationship, whether that's in the workplace, or just out and about day to day. And to have really clear communication and to understand when it's time to debunk some myths. You know, it's so sad sometimes. I hear so many mistruths and falsehoods and myths around ADHD. You know, the first one I hear still from time to time is that only boys can have ADHD. And that we know it's just simply not true. You know, women and girls and boys have it in equal measure. It's just that women and girls have been let down for so long by the medical community. It was only 20 odd years ago that people realised that women and girls could have ADHD. How many women and girls were told that they just need to stop being too sensitive, or they're just anxious, or that they just need to try harder? It's the biggest myth, I think, that really causes the most damage. And also that ADHD is only, you have to be only physical hyperactivity. You can't have ADHD, you're not running around throwing toys around, you're not screaming. You know, we know now that for many people it can be very internalized. It can be those highly caffeinated squirrels that from outsider, you look very still, you can look very quiet, but inside it can be chaos. Inside it can be a million thoughts happening simultaneously, each one pulling you in a different direction, and that overwhelm that I described earlier. And I think finally, you know, the myth that has to be debunked is that, and the media really is not helping this narrative, is that everyone has ADHD these days. It's so sad because so many people, particularly women and girls, have been let down for so long. They've been misdiagnosed, they've been simply told that they need to try harder, and they're finally getting answers. Loads of women and girls are playing catch up after years and years and years of being misunderstood and let down. But then you see newspapers and other sources say ADHD is overdiagnosed, and it's simply not true. We know that around 7% of human beings would reach the criteria for an ADHD diagnosis. The issue comes because ADHD, the traits of, are very human behaviours. You know, everyone will from time to time forget their car keys, everyone will from time to time zone out of conversation. Everyone will from time to time have moments of creative brilliance. But when a neurotypical person does that, the ups and downs are like a little wave. Whereas when someone who reaches the criteria for an ADHD diagnosis does it, the highs of those swings are like the summit of Everest, and the lows are like the lowest point on earth. And it's the continuousness of those swings and the never-endingness and how exhausting those swings are, that when not understood and not managed can lead to some really challenging comorbidities with undiagnosed ADHD. We know that anxiety, depression, and in a lot of cases, you know, tragically, we see dire outcomes for undiagnosed ADHD. It's the most frustrating myth that everyone has ADHD. It's simply not true, and it's the one that so many of us have to fight back for. I remember when I got my diagnosis, I posted on LinkedIn and I said, I have ADHD, and I just posted about it. And someone said, you must be brave to talk about ADHD. And I was so angry because I thought, well, no, the presumption of bravery is proof that stigma exists. It's proof that stigma and discrimination and stereotyping exists. And it's because of those things that people don't ask for help. They don't ask for help in the workplace. They don't feel comfortable to talk to their partner. It's the reason so many people suffer in silence. And that triggered this justice sensitivity inside me. It's why I started the podcast. It's why I wrote the book. It's why I talk about ADHD probably too much. Probably so much. Because I will talk about ADHD until I hear less of you must be brave to talk about ADHD. Because until I hear less of you must be brave to talk about ADHD, that's when I know that the stigma is reducing. And that's when I know that more people are asking for help. I think so many people in the community, after a diagnosis, you go through this journey of looking back through your life up until that point with this new understanding, this new lens of ADHD. And you start adding colour and context to past behaviours. Maybe ADHD is the reason I acted in that way. Maybe that's why that relationship didn't work. Maybe that's why that relationship did work. Maybe that's why that business took off. Maybe ADHD was the reason I shouldn't have got that job. It wasn't the right fit. And you can go through this grieving process. You can get very emotional for the life that could have been, or really should have been, if you had just known earlier. So many of us wish that we could go back in time with this new understanding of ADHD and almost put your arms around the younger version of yourself. I wish I could go back and put my arms around the 7-year-old me in the corridor having that anxiety attack and reassure him at that stage that he's not broken, he's just different, and that he is enough. But of course I can't do that. I don't have a time machine. I can't reassure the younger version of myself that there is brilliance within him and that the world is scared of difference, so people will tell you that you're too much or you're not enough or that you're too sensitive, because people are scared of difference. But the truth is that great minds think differently, and the people that have ADHD and that have these brilliant minds need to figure this out as early as possible. I think I would like to say thank you very much and really like to answer some questions. Thank you very much.
teacher in a further education college, and I teach in the music department and the games department. So I would say that most of my students have symptoms of ADHD, or a lot of them have diagnoses of ADHD. Is there something that we could do that would help them without completely rearranging our staffing and timetables?
Thank you so much for the question. I mean, it sounds like you're doing a brilliant job, by the way, just to start with. Teachers, from my experience, like all of them have an understanding and want to help neurodivergent kids. I think for many ADHD kids or neurodivergent kids, school, just by the way it's set up and in its very nature, is a trauma factory. And that's not the fault of any person. That's just because I think the school system is completely like outdated and not fit for purpose for many kids who just don't want to sit in a classroom and don't care about maths or whatever it is. But I think, you know, encouraging movement breaks, there's things you can do to mitigate it. Encouraging movement breaks, having visual aids, like putting a dialogue between the. If I had my first anxiety attack when I was 6 or 7 in a classroom, and I think if there was a dialogue between the parents, my parents, and my teacher at that stage, then my parents could have almost like made a bio of my presentation at home. At home, Alex is very creative, entrepreneurial, happy, and the teacher could have done the same. And in class, Alex is very quiet. Alex like needs to contribute more. And if that was shared and there was a dialogue between my parents and the teacher at that stage, then that difference would have been picked up a lot sooner, and an intervention could have been brought in at a much earlier stage. But I think ultimately, you know, it's about, I think, reminding kids that because a lot of kids have like a special interest, they have like a preoccupation, an obsession, and you always encourage children to follow that passion. And I think, but of course, you have to do certain subjects, right? Because we have a curriculum and everything. But it's about reminding that kid that if your special interests, if you want to be a tree surgeon, if you want to be a dancer, if you want to be whatever, doesn't align with what you're being judged on at school, then that's not your worth. If you're not interested in maths, history, science, that's okay. And I think it's just about reinforcing that message to children as often as we can, because so many kids go through school and because they are judged on those metrics and they get a U or a fail, a lot of kids do, and they think that defines their worth and their capabilities going forward. And we know that is terrible for comorbidities going forward in terms of like mental health and low self-esteem and how you feel about yourself. I had a brilliant guest on my podcast, and she had a teddy bear made for her daughter who was autistic, and on the chest of the teddy bear it said "never too much," embroidered. And the message was twofold. It was to remind the child that she was not too much, but also to say anything that you want to come to me with, any issues at school, nothing's off the table, nothing's too much. And she said from that point forward, like the bond was so much stronger between her and her child, and actually enabled her to have a really meaningful dialogue between how her child was presenting at school compared to how the child was presenting at home. I think that's so important, but also just generally to, you know, reinforce that message time and time again that whatever, you know, you will be interested, you will be passionate, you will be almost obsessed potentially with some things, and if they don't align with what the school says you're being judged on, then that's not a metric of your worth.
Hi, thank you. That was really insightful. I was just wondering how your personal relationships with family, friends, romantic relationships, that kind of thing, really improved after your diagnosis, and how that kind of support was solidified once it was more recognised.
So it's been massively positive. Pre-diagnosis, I had 5 relationships that I can look back now. I mean, there were great moments of them, but RSD destroyed all of them. You know, the rows that I can look back now and see were triggered by a comment that they didn't mean anything by, but because I and in two of the other relationships, there was most likely a similar neurotype happening, and without an understanding of, okay, you're dealing with RSD in a relationship, if you don't know that, then it's almost like catastrophically doomed to fail, because you're just going to get triggered so easily in a supermarket, at an airport, wherever, and you're just going to rout. And that's what happened. But now, since diagnosis, totally aware of RSD. My partner now is totally aware of it too. So when we have like an emotional understanding of what is in the relationship outside of just me and Tanya. And now what I mean by that is, like, we have ADHD. So we like intentionally set time aside as often as we can to really communicate a period of time that has just passed. And life is busy and we don't always do it, but as often as we can, we aim for weekly, like we sit down on a Friday night or on a Sunday morning and we just go through like the last 7 days. Like, what happened? What happened during that last 7 days that was great? What happened that was not so great? Okay, that thing happened on Tuesday night in the supermarket that clearly triggered myself or her, and we really retrospectively analyse it and we try to figure out why. And you always have fun with it. Like, when you have an awareness of it and you both understand it, then you can go a lot easier. And like, if you are triggered, then just don't like escalate it in the moment. Just like get out of the house, or go for a run, walk the dog, whatever. And almost journal, like document the event, so you sort of can build up this catalogue of triggers. And it's really helpful to have like a little code word sometimes if you're out and about at a dinner with other people and something happens but you get triggered. You can have like a little code word or a code signal between you, like a double tap on the shoulder, and you say, well, I just need to go to the loo for 5 minutes, but that signal is one of you's been triggered and you're just kind of getting out of the situation for 5 minutes because if you don't do that, you can just sit there, you can either just like internalise it and go really silent, and everyone's like, Alex, are you alright, what's wrong? Or some people, especially if alcohol's involved, like you can go the other way and blow up, which neither is really productive. But with my family, so I got diagnosed, and we've all been on this journey together because I got diagnosed 2 years ago, and I kind of went to my parents with it. My mum didn't fully, but it's sad, but it's an echo of many people's stories. My mum didn't really think that ADHD was real at the time when I got my diagnosis. She sort of said, "Oh, don't be silly, that's not." But 2 years later, she's like, "I'm ADHD." So she's gone on her journey really fast, which is amazing. She has that curiosity to do that, and she has that same with my brother and sister and dad. Like it's like hugely genetic. Oh, grandpa, I see that. So at first it was met with resistance, but that's just kind of generational. Ignorance is a bit harsh word, but it's just there wasn't the awareness there. But when your children get diagnosed with something, she just went into like research mode, and I think she now totally is on board, and she's sees it in herself a lot too.
So I've ran. Sounds very fun. I've ran a business for about 5 years. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and I love doing it. I also find that it's something that I like massively procrastinate with, so I'll get really good ideas, I'll have high highs and low lows with it. And I suppose I'm just asking really, how would you manage that? Because with running your own business, I feel like I can't really massively avoid burnout, but constantly feel burnt out, but also feel like there's no other option because self-employed, running your own business and stuff. And I suppose just how would you manage that, trying to run a successful business without procrastinating?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think procrastination, I would reframe procrastination as like, again, going back to that kind of recharging. And as someone, I don't know if you have ADHD or not, but you probably have like an abundance of energy and brilliance, and the things that you obviously have, you've got your own business. But as a cost of that, you're more susceptible to running out of gas. And I think that's okay. I think, with great highs, which is what creates brilliance in ADHD, comes naturally with lows as a consequence. And I think there's no shame, there's nothing wrong with having those lows. It's just a natural cycle. What goes up has to come down, and not beating yourself up when you just have to have a day off, or an hour off, or a week off, whatever that is. I think it's so important to find accountability within your business that's outside of yourself. If I'm running, before I brought other people into the podcast or shared my goals with other people, it's so easy to just not do that important thing or send that invoice. But when I body double with my producer, and we don't even need to share conversation. If it's first thing in the morning, we could just be on a webcam together, and just being in someone else's presence can be enough to sort of feed off their energy and to get over that procrastination hump. Because there are tasks that just don't come naturally to me. I can't send invoices unless I'm body doubling with someone. But it's so important to be honest with yourself as well about what your strengths and weaknesses are. I think it's such an ADHD thing to kind of not want to relinquish control, and to be quite stubborn, to just go through and wanting to be in control and do everything yourself. But of course that's not possible, and delegating things that you struggle with. Because otherwise, if you just try and do everything yourself, you will just burn out more and more and more. So I think really not being ashamed of burnout and taking breaks. With great highs come great lows. Finding accountability and not being ashamed to take the foot off the gas when it's necessary. And also what's helped me massively when I'm struggling with procrastination a little bit too much is the gamification, and really trying to bring novelty and fun into tasks that I would otherwise really struggle with. And what do I mean by that? I mean really silly things that actually enable me to do the task. Like can I clean my flat in the time that it takes me to finish my favourite song? Or I press play on whatever song it is, and can I hoover my flat in 3.5 minutes? Things like that. Add and assign points to tasks is really helpful. All of these things, I used to have so much shame because I thought, I'm 36, I don't need to gamify sending emails. But sometimes you do, and sometimes you have to break down what you might think is a simple task into smaller tasks, because it's really not. Sometimes sending an email can feel impossible. It can literally feel like you're trying to lift a bag full of metal, and it's just impossible. And you break down that task into the tiniest of ice cubes just to get through it. Step 1, turn on your laptop, press the on button. That's it. And give yourself a pat on the back. Some days, some days that will feel impossible. Step 2, type www, go to your email thing. That's stage 2. Break down these big tasks into smaller ones, and to not be ashamed that sometimes you have to really chisel those icebergs into really, really small ice cubes, because we are really susceptible to getting overwhelmed. Because with the brilliance that is within us also leaves us vulnerable to that overwhelm.
That's good, thank you.
Can we have a show of hands if anyone else has a question? Yeah.
Too close to the microwave. So, you mentioned before friendships. That's one thing that I've always had a problem with, maintaining them, keeping them, and thinking that there's something more. I can meet somebody in a bathroom and then automatically think they're the best friends for life. I can't seem to separate it. Have you got any tips on friendships in general?
So I totally relate. It's very easy to make a friend very, very quickly, and to kind of hyper focus on that person and to find out everything about them and think that you're going to be best friends forever, only to 2 weeks later just lose the energy to reply to the text, and then it's almost like you can't. If you leave too long before reply, then the RSD kind of kicks in, and you think, oh God, now they hate me. And you just never reply.
Weird.
Yeah.
Full on, and then it becomes like a weird relationship thing.
Yeah. And it just floats off and you never see them again. And that is a cycle that I've certainly experienced. I think for me it's about finding your tribe. You can almost kind of detect and feel it when you meet someone, that you almost don't need to put in those sort of neurotypical standards of friendship maintenance. My best friend's a guy called Dave, who we met at school. I haven't seen him for 3 years. But I know that if I see him, And he's the same. And it sounds quite sad to a lot of people who don't get it, but knowing that he is there, and likewise with him, if there was a crisis, is amazing. And if I did meet him, I met him 3 years ago, and I hadn't met him for a year and a half prior to that, it's like no time has passed. We'll sit down, we'll play Xbox, we're completely ourselves around each other. And I think it's about finding like what types of friendships are important to you, and not beating yourself up. Because people will come into your life like, sometimes, often it's going back to that self-awareness thing. It's like not realising if someone is a good fit or not. But yeah, normally you can tell, if you meet someone and it's a good fit, you're interrupting each other all the time, you can't get a word in. You just talk a million miles, finishing each other's sentences, you know how each other's sentences are going to finish. But yeah, it's very relatable. I think I have to sometimes put reminders, more so with family, because I have to put that object permanence thing. It sounds really sad, but I can forget sometimes that my family exists. And obviously I know that they exist, but I just don't speak to my mum for weeks and weeks and weeks. So I have to put visual reminders on my fridge, call mum. Really simple things to maintain the relationships that are important, but because of the obsession that I'm in with my work and the object permanence, where everything else around that obsession can be invisible sometimes, I have to put extra effort into bringing those things that are important into my now. And that looks like a post-it note on the fridge sometimes, call mum, speak to Dave. So yeah, it's challenging, but really it's finding your tribe and really cherishing those friendships when you do find them, the ones that are a really good fit.
It's feel weird stood actually, yeah. Let's go to the back of the room. So you must get loads of exciting opportunities, I'd imagine. Lots of things come your way. I struggle a bit of work with it's not saying no to things I don't want to do, I'll say no to that all day long. It's saying no to all the things I do want to do. Like I was just saying, I've booked myself onto 2 workshops at opposite ends of the country on the same day. Both sounded really exciting, and they both came today. Can't be in 2 places, apparently. How have you managed, and then I get burnt out, inevitably, right, and I can't be in all these different places. How have you found that, or how do you, because you must get so many opportunities, you literally can't do them all. What's the thing when it's not things you don't want to do, but it's things you do want to do, to find that balance in your life?
Yeah, it's such an important point. It's so easy for us to fall into that trap of just going yes. It's not about being a yes man, because that's like you said, that means saying things that you don't want to do. But there's lots of things that we do want to do, and we can't do everything because we're human. But we get very excited at that stage where we're asked. So yes, I do. I think it's really doubling down on that, just that 24-hour rule, and just really trying to put that gap between whatever you're being asked to do in your response. It's so easy when you're in that moment and someone says, do you want to come to this event? Do you want to come to this party? Do you want to come to this work? Dopamine just goes through the roof in that moment. And that you lose touch of rationale when you're in that phase. And it feels amazing to say yes in that period. But then you come down from that the next day and you check the calendar and you realise you've overcommitted. I think it's just so important at that stage to really train your knee-jerk reaction, which for so many of us is an instant yes. Yes, absolutely, I'll be there. But just change that if you can to can I let you know later? And that takes practice. But the more you do it, the more you realise that no one has a problem with you saying that. Because I was so scared I can't say, can I let you know tomorrow? They'll think that I'll just think that they hate me. That's rude. But it's really not. People don't have an issue with you just saying, can I let you know? Can I come back to you tomorrow? Or can I come back to you in a week, whatever it is? And the more you do that, the more evidence you get that it's okay to put that boundary around your time. And it's so important, particularly with someone with ADHD, because like you said, you just overcommit, you take on too much. And the anxiety of that, because then you've got to let someone down, right? You've got to essentially let someone down, you've got to send that text, or you just have to ghost someone and never see them again because they hate you now in your head. So yeah, it's just about protecting that with everything you have, and that in the immediate step is just training that muscle to not say yes and just to say, can I let you know tomorrow?
Hi. What advice would you give to parents of a recently diagnosed teenager?
Yeah, it's a big question. So I would recommend to like reinforce to the teenager that they should never worry alone, and encourage that teenager to find community, listen to podcasts, read books, like find decent support groups, make them know that they're not the only person that's dealing with this condition. I think children, teenagers with ADHD really respond well when they're put in the driver's seat. And you can put little adjustments in place, like rather than say like, do you need to do your homework tonight? You can say like, do you want to do your homework at 7 p.m. or 10 past 7? And it's not really making a tangible difference to your schedule, but it's putting them in the driver's seat. And there's a lot of kids with ADHD, teenagers, deal with this defiance disorder. They don't like being told what to do, and that can be the cause of a lot of tantrums and conflict within families. I think just making simple adjustments to, would you like dinner at 7 or 7:05? It's just putting them in the driver's seat, but also like framing, because you will have to correct behaviour sometimes, and I think rather than like snapping or shouting and making that person feel like they're broken, it's maybe framing a corrective message through the lens of consequence. And what do I mean by that? I mean, like if you're in a restaurant and that teenager is throwing food around, they're getting restless. Like rather than saying like stop doing that, you can say like if you carry on doing that, then you're going to mess up that person's clothes. It's like ADHD teenagers really respond well to like reason, and putting the reason for a change in required change of behaviour through the lens of consequence rather than just shouting down. But really it's hard, I think it's about reinforcing that message again, that they're not broken, that they're just different, because by that stage, being a teenager, they've probably been on the receiving end of a lot of criticisms and a lot of comments. I think it's so important to make them aware as early as possible about many of the RSD, for example, and how that they, as a consequence of events up until that point in their life, they might be susceptible to being triggered, and to really sort of bridge that understanding as soon as possible, so when it does happen, they have meaning, which I think many people with ADHD lack, and that causes a lot of shame and anxiety and confusion and not understanding why. And I think when you go through life without that why, and you don't understand your behaviour, then that can lead on to a lot of damaging behaviour later on. So yeah, really, to summarise, I think just finding community, encourage as much research and learning as possible at that age.
We're in a room now with 95% lovely ladies, which is great. And we've talked about ladies and ADHD not being sort of prominent sort of in the 90s, going into the 2000s. We're at a high point where obviously not very many males in the room at the moment. How do we get males to talk about, not the macho figure, but actually talk about ADHD and the emotions and the depression and the suicide that comes along with that? Because I think men don't open up as much as they should do, and that's why maybe it's not diagnosed later on, or they need to fit in with the crowd. So I'm just wondering on a male stance of where you think that stands.
Yeah, if anything, I think it's a great question, by the way. And it's, I think one of the most important questions of the evening. We know that undiagnosed ADHD, we know that you are very vulnerable to some very serious comorbidities when you don't understand, particularly men, when I think sometimes the gap can be wider between like the inner child, the inner version of them that is vulnerable and is vulnerable to being triggered, and the version of them that they're presenting, because they feel like they have to be supportive and strong and the provider and the figure. But I think what's really helped me is finding community and really chiseling away at that inner voice that tells me that I can't be vulnerable. I think as soon as you realise that you can be vulnerable in a trusted environment, and for me that's Alcoholics Anonymous, You know, I mentioned my story with alcohol at the start of my talk, and my scaffolding that enables me to maintain my sobriety, which is the foundation that everything else is built on. If I have a drink, then I can't stop drinking, and I will be in hospital tomorrow, and everything that I am doing will fall down. And for me, the support group and community that keeps that foundation strong is Alcoholics Anonymous, and some people in my life that I trust, and they trust me, and we know. I think it's so important to just encourage communication. And the issue with men, it is really hard, because in a lot of social groups, men kind of know that that's not what they need to do. They know, you know, there's a sign at every train station saying, "Just talk to me." You know, you'll see the posters. Men know, a lot of men know, but it's that fear of like, well, that's going against the image I need to portray to be a strong man and to be a provider. But it's so important to put messaging that contradicts that out as often as possible in the right places. And a lot of the time it's confidentiality. Like, men do want to open up, but they want to do it in a confidential way, because that, in a way, kind of instantly stops that fear of external judgment, which is what stops so many men from speaking up. And how do you do that? Therapy, someone you genuinely trust. And I think it's just about like putting out as much narrative as possible to contradict the nonsense that men can't talk about their feelings, because we know that when men don't talk about their feelings, that's when they're really vulnerable.
Amazing, thank you. Thank you everyone for your questions.
Thank you so much for coming to Runcorn and for being so generous with your time. Thank you everyone for engaging so well.
Can you put the mic closer to your mouth? We can't hear.
Yeah, of course. It's fine. I know. I'll just shout. So yeah, that was it really. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you We've got another talk. Sorry, while you're still there, Alex. We're over you. We've got another talk next month, which has just come up on the screen. So it's about the link between gut health and mental health. So we've got lovely Dana coming to do a talk, and also a very exciting guest panel we can't announce yet, but they are very exciting people that are going to be on. So yeah, so tickets are available now on the early bird. There's only 30 that are at the early bird price, so if you want to get them quickly, no one else knows about it yet. So thank you everyone for coming, and thank you again to Alex.